I spent the whole day thinking about this, and I'm now completely not completely undecided, but I'm not prepared to take a stance.
I'm also largely undecided, but what I can do is I can try to present what I think the predominant arguments are for the people in favor of Nazi punching.
Fair enough.
Let's start this off. Hi, this is the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
And I'm Sean, guest.
And Sean is filling in for Katrina today, as she could not make it. And we are doing one of these special, I don't know, what do we call them, mini episodes? Something? Yeah. Well, not during our regular time, because something happened and we wanted to talk about it. And the thing that happened this time is a Nazi douchebag named Richard Spencer got punched in the face on the street while he was stopped by a reporter who wanted to ask him about his Pepe pin and maybe some of his other weird political views. And a member, probably from Black Bloc, is the speculation, because he was dressed, all in black, like the Black Bloc suggested uniform is, just hauled off and slugged him right in the face and then ran off. And there has been a bit of a kerfuffle, one could say, in liberal circles about whether or not it is okay to punch Nazis.
Right.
And I guess before we start, we should quickly say who this Richard Spencer guy is. He founded the website alternativeright.com, which as sort of a combined group blog thing for alt-right thinkers, and is probably the guy who originated the term alt-right, since the website was Alternative Right, and he kicked it off. He left that eventually. He's got a new website now, also spreading alt-right stuff, and he is... to call it a think tank kind of blows it out of proportion here. But he's head of a group called National Policy Institute, which bill themselves as a think tank of alt-right stuff, trying to influence policy. They, if you knew of Richard Spencer beforehand, it's probably either because you're very into alt-right stuff, or because you saw that video after Trump won, where this guy in a hotel room was saying, "Hail our people, hail Trump."
And straight up doing the Hail Hitler salute.
Yes,
there was nothing ambiguous about it.
No, and the audience was, hailing him back with the Hitler salute.
Yep.
Yeah. So very much a neo-Nazi on his, even though he says the neo-Nazis hate him, I think it's not unfair to call him a Nazi, especially because he, on his site, one of his co-bloggers published a thing saying that we should be asking whether black genocide is the correct course of action or not.
Right. So you might not be able to technically call him a neo-Nazi because he's not calling for a particular form of genocide, but he's still entertaining the idea that genocide is a legitimate course of action. Yeah.
Should at the very least be considered and, possibly legitimate.
Someone found a quote for me today. I was talking with them about this. Mm-hmm. And it's from the Wayback Machine, which takes cached versions of websites
And this one is actually from
Alternative Right. Yeah. And it doesn't have his attribution on it. It's a picture, unfortunately. I couldn't even get the URL to reproduce.
Oh, I know what you're about to read. That was Collins, his co-blogger.
This?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. Well, in that case, then I can't say this came right out of his mouth, so...
It was at least tacitly approved by him.
Paraphrasing, it does say exactly what the two of you guys just said, so... Yeah. I was curious, I was like, well,
go ahead and read the actual quote.
Brace yourselves. Quote, "However, for too long now, when we consider the questions of race, especially questions concerning the black race, we have been framing things in completely the wrong way. Instead of asking how we can make reparations for slavery, colonialism, and apartheid, or how we can equalize academic scores and incomes, we should instead be asking questions like, does human civilization actually need the black race? Is black genocide right? And, if it is, what would be the best and easiest way to dispose of them? With starting points like this, wisdom is sure to flourish, enlightenment to dawn." Unquote. So I feel icky. And I gotta say, coming into this, my initial response, I didn't even hear about this incident until yesterday when Eneasz wanted to talk about it. I was like, well, I'm really not in favor of hitting anybody to silence their free speech. And then I spent the whole day thinking about it. I'm currently undecided. And I've got to say, reading a quote like that makes me kind of want to hit somebody. So I can kind of see where people are coming from.
Yeah, it's not hard to find. You go on social media, there's a whole lot of, for quite some time, there's been a lot of argument from pathos and memes getting posted that are things, it's like there's a whole bunch of Captain America saying it's okay to punch Nazis. And it's like, well, my grandfather, I'm pretty sure he was okay with killing Nazis. So there's a lot of this seems intuitively okay to enact violence, physical violence against people with these extreme views, like these really potentially very harmful extreme views, right?
Sort of. I guess my one caveat on that is I don't want to really look to the past for moral guidance, right? If we go back far enough, a lot of our ancestors were complete idiots.
It was also
right. I wasn't advocating for it. I was just stating what a lot of it's been going around.
For sure.
It was also a very different situation because we were literally at war, and these were people who, not only were we at war with them, but these were people who had rounded people up and systemically killed them, as opposed to simply someone on a blog being a douchebag and sometimes posting asshole YouTube videos.
I wonder if a good corollary, I guess, well, since we're not actively at war with people who are doing stuff like, in World War II, if it might be the moral distinction between killing a Nazi soldier and killing a Nazi sympathizer supporter at home.
Right.
Who I would be a Nazi, but, my leg in World War I, otherwise I'd be out there. Like, that person's not actually out there doing anything, but I don't know. I do want to say, though, really quick, though Katrina's not with us, she did ask us to point out there might be a weakness in our point of views or a bias in that I think it's an excellent point for us to point out that none of us are actually in the demographics historically attacked by Nazis. So yeah, that's a fair point. I don't know if my point of view would be different if I was in one of those groups, but obviously I don't know. So that's something that I guess is worth putting up from the outset.
Yeah. So I would like to quickly present my point of view on this. I am one of those people who is very against punching Richard Spencer. And against, I'm not necessarily against him getting punched because he's a douchebag and he deserves it, but I am horrified that what I thought was the liberal side of America is so gleefully embracing vigilante violence. So we've a few times before on the podcast brushed up against the topic of violence, and I've always kind of danced around the issue because I am somewhat pro-violence, much more so than I thought anyway, other people are. And so I was really kind of ashamed of that and didn't really want to say it. But I've long been a big fan of the Black Panthers, and I consider during the civil rights struggle, that is a legitimate use of violence. I mean, that was state-sponsored terrorism by our government against some of our own citizens. This is a reason to take up arms, and I fully support them, and I just didn't really want to say that sort of thing in public because I thought I was in the minority and it was shameful. And then this punch happens, and it turns out that there's a lot of people that are a lot more violent than I am. So the reason I am against this guy getting punched and everyone being so happy about it is entirely just the rule of law. The thing that protects us from random people coming up and punching us because they disagree with our views is the fact that extrajudicial violence is not tolerated in our society. The reason that their Nazi groups don't get to riot in the street and punch people is because we don't accept that sort of thing. And once society does start accepting extrajudicial violence, then that is when we get things like the Deep South, lynchings and those sorts of atrocities, because there is no protection anymore for the people who aren't on the right side of the mob.
You mean the Deep South in the somewhat recent past?
Not
yesterday.
Currently.
Yeah.
No, but it's several decades past.
So I guess I'm sort of in between. I deal him exactly where Eneasz is, in that I mean, if I have any axioms of discourse, well, I have a bunch, I guess, if you're engaging honestly with people. But one of them is, like, if you disagree with somebody, it doesn't matter how much you disagree with what they're saying. Like, shutting them up by hitting them is, I guess, what's a stronger word than taboo or wrong? Like, it is incorrect if you're trying to, if there's discussion. But I guess you could say
it is a sin against civil society.
Yeah, that works. Sin is, I guess, a strong enough word. I mean, this guy wasn't really doing discussion. He's got this platform that preaches this disgusting message. So it's not like it was, him talking with somebody. It's not like he and the reporter were talking and the reporter was so repelled by what the answers to the questions that he got, or the questions that he posed, that he then hit him in the face. It was somebody else who came up and did it.
Yeah.
So that's not a perfect analogy. I guess I'm where you are on the front of it, Eneasz, but I guess I spent the whole day thinking about this, and I had this, this moment where in my head I'm like, really, Stephen, is your moral view so convoluted that you're looking at hitting Nazis as, is this an okay thing to do or not? Like, isn't that axiomatically a great thing? What would Captain America think, like you pointed out, Sean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if I haven't been following a lot of the online discourse about how the fallout here. I'm not sure if people are saying, yeah, we should hit every conservative, or if they're saying we should just hit Nazis.
No, everyone is saying we should just hit Nazis.
Oh, okay. Well, so I guess if you drew the litmus test at explicit Nazis. Maybe there's a case that someone can make there, and I'm curious what you have to say, Sean.
Sure. So, I guess my overall position on this right now is that I'm largely undecided, kind of like yourself, where it's, previously we had a Facebook thread where I had a bit of input, and I agree with something Inyash said where it was essentially, if you strike someone in public, in this case, Richard Spencer stands to potentially gain from being struck in public because, and not just him personally, it seems like this gives the right, for lack of a more concise term, more ammunition to repudiate the left, right, and protesters in general. But also, it might make someone like Richard Spencer more able to cast himself as a victim and gather more support from others. I'm not sure who you would be able to get support from exactly. I mean, given that, and maybe this is just my own bubble, but I would like to think that Nazism is something, or at very least like white nationalism, is something that people generally find morally reprehensible.
Well, I mean, they can barely fill a hotel conference room with 200 people when they have their national convention.
Right. It's a very small portion. Did they have, was it 200? Because I thought it was like 300. But either way, it's a very, very small subsect of
We're not talking
society.
Tens of thousands.
Right.
Right.
And I don't know if they're gaining power, losing it, stagnant. They're just such a small minority that maybe they're just not that much of a threat.
How much power could 200 people have, right? I guess even if they're gaining it, how long would it take them to gain any measurable portion of power?
The argument I hear in favor of against this, they don't have a lot of power thing, is that their words are violent, I guess, that they are making people feel unsafe and threatened by advocating for genocide.
Oh yes, and also just the concern surrounding the people that Trump has appointed to his cabinet, who also allegedly have some very questionable views.
Steve Bannon from Breitbart is part of the alt-right, and I think he wrote his inauguration speech and has some fair bit of input. But I don't think that that is a reason to start beating people in the streets if they express an opinion that is found to be distasteful. I mean, that's basically what freedom of speech is, right? We don't need to protect the speech we like. We have to protect the speech we don't like. That's why the people that fight for the First Amendment rights, or the people who get dragged into court and the First Amendment gets strengthened when they are defended, are people like the Westboro Baptists or Larry Flynt, which actually a lot of people like Larry Flynt now. But, he was a pornographer and people found him disgusting. And the Supreme Court said this is what freedom of speech means. I mean, I'm hearing that people are saying someone has to punch this guy to put him in his place because the government isn't doing it. And I'm saying, yes, that's true, because he hasn't broken any laws. He's spoken and said things that are horrible, but that's what the First Amendment allows him to do. That's what it's there for. I think there is a problem when we have to punch people because we have issue with the First Amendment. Isn't that a thing that we're supposed to like on our side? We enjoy the right to speak freely?
Well, I mean, so one argument I've seen is the fire clause. Like if someone goes into a crowded theater and yells fire, obviously, I guess the idea there is that there should be limits, like certain limits to the First Amendment when it comes to endangering through the use of words, right? Mm-hmm. And so I guess it really comes down to how dangerous you can consider the words of Richard Spencer and his ilk, and whether or not. I mean, that sort of thing seems difficult to quantify.
I mean, yes, it's very hard to quantify, but my intuitive feeling is that all these people who are pro-punching fascists and Nazis are people who view themselves as like the barrier stopping the Holocaust from happening again on our soil, and they're very self-righteous about it, when that is not anything close to what the actual threat is. And what they're really doing is degrading the law that protects people from violence. The fact that he said things you don't like is not a reason to allow for beatings in the streets of anyone that is labeled a Nazi.
I think part of my hang up on this, I guess, is how you this will sound like a pointless question, but I'll give a good example of how you define a Nazi.
Oh, no.
Or how you spot one.
That is very much a thing I'm worried about, too.
There was
I think that's a good question.
Yeah, there was a great incident on Friday night at University of Washington. They had some speaker that was coming that people were protesting. Apparently some asshole. It's not really important. But what is important is that some guy got shot. He was allegedly by the shooter said that while he attacked me, I don't want to misquote, but allegedly, apparently, the shooter thought that the guy was a neo-Nazi because he saw that he had a swastika tattoo on his arm, or a swastika tattoo on his shoulder or something. I'll link the article. It turns out it was a swastika inside one of those, like, red circles with the line through it. That's like a, no smoking sign.
It's like anti-swastika, basically.
Yeah. So, maybe it wasn't as obvious as he wanted it to be, but it begs the question of how many false positives you're willing to tolerate to take out a crowd of a couple hundred people. Especially if the error rate right now is one guy punched, one guy shot, and the guy who got shot wasn't in this group. Apparently the guy who got shot was campaigning for Bernie Sanders, goes to Black Lives Matter rallies, plans to go to the Women's March, but he was in the hospital. To me, the slope is slippery and blurry as far as where you draw the line. So if it's just literal Nazis, well, what about people who don't go to the rallies, or go to the, what do you call them, conventions or something, but they share their memes on Facebook? Do we punch them too? Or do they just get slapped? A lot of this is like...
I have seen calls on Twitter that anyone defending a Nazi is also a Nazi, and seeing as I am someone saying that
that's
Richard
dangerous,
Spencer
though.
shouldn't have been punched, I am now considered a Nazi as well.
Yeah, well, there's
by these people anyway,
and not to muddle this or shoot us in too far a different direction, but there's also like different gradients of these worldviews where it's like we have straight up neo-Nazism, we also have white nationalism. I don't know how much you would differentiate those, but then you've got things like I actually just found out about this, something called what was it? A kinist, I think it's called. And I'm probably not even representing this properly, but I don't have any real notes in front of me. But there are people who believe that humans should naturally fall into ethnic and tribal communities.
Okay.
So it's kind of brushes up again, and they also
the people are happier when they're around their own type, and so they shouldn't mix, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like I've definitely heard people espouse these ideas that it seems to kind of hint at they're against interracial marriage and stuff like that, and it seems like there's a little bit with Norse mythological imagery associated with them, and it's just I'm not entirely sure what to make of that. So I thought it might be worth mentioning that it seems like there are different kind of white nationalist-esque subsets of people, not just Nazis.
Yeah, and I guess that does beg the question of where you would draw a line to say, well, no, we're only going to hit people who do exactly this. And I guess, it depends too, and I did see this on your Facebook thread, that it depends on how serious you consider a punch to the face.
Mm-hmm.
It was like an elbow. It was like a flying. It was just a run by.
Yeah, I watched the video. That could easily kill somebody. If you land wrong, he's on the street. He could be hit. You could hit a curb. That could have been a kill shot. Right. And you don't have to hit the curb. Just a good head smack. It happens. It happens. Yeah. So was he prepared to kill this guy? Maybe he was. And so I guess
I think if you were there are better ways to ensure someone's death than trying to elbow them in the face.
Oh yeah.
Plus, he was mobile while he was doing it, so the body mechanics that he would have used to deliver the strike wouldn't have been as grounded as if he were standing there.
I meant was he prepared to kill this guy? Not was he trying to? Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Was prepared to deal with that possible consequence.
I have seen a lot of people saying something like that. He's, an able-bodied man. He can take a punch. It's not that big a deal. But once you're advocating for punching Nazis, you don't know if this guy's been punched 12 times already today, and you're the 13th punch. Is it okay to keep punching him until he's crippled?
I think they'd probably say so. I guess I'm also curious, too, what the point is of hitting him. Other than to express disagreement. I could kind of see it would be... I might also object to this, but it would be more civil, I think, to stand next to him and whenever he opened his mouth to blare an air horn. Mm. If you're in
kind
public,
of like the guy who was yelling no,
yeah.
The no guy, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the guy who was holding the camera, the amateur footage, right?
There was we might be talking about the same thing. I'm thinking of one where there was a guy in public, saying racist things basically, and there was someone standing right up next to him, and every time he would say something, the guy would go no. He would just try to drown him out. He'd just yell in his face.
See, that's certainly much better than straight up violence, but even that is the sort of thing that I kind of dislike because it shuts down conversation. And I think once you can no longer talk with your enemy, the only thing that you can do is kill them. You have to either beat them into submission, which almost never happens, because when Black Lives Matter protesters someone jumps up on them and tries to beat them down, do they go crawling back and saying, "Oh no, we're done, we can't do this anymore," or do they rally and become even more strident in their opposition? I mean, that's the thing. Everyone thinks, yes, I will intimidate my opponents and beat them down, and they will not be a problem anymore. But no, it entrenches your opponents when they get physical resistance like this.
And I'm assuming there's a strong overlap with the neo-Nazi group and, like, gun collectors / gun hoarders. So these aren't the people you want to bunker down and piss off, right? I mean, unless you want it to be turned into a quick, bloody battle that kills all of them. But.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're actually seeking to eradicate your opposition, you should be trying to talk with them. An argument always gets a counter-argument. It never gets a bullet or a punch, violence. You don't use violence to come to a civil society.
I'm just curious, like what. I definitely I see where you're going, but I'm just wondering what kind of productive conversation, what would a productive conversation with a neo-Nazi look like? It's it's so antithetical to society. It's so diametrically opposed to like basic human decency that I don't like what's the middle point? How is this meeting of the minds going to end in something that's going to advance the dialogue and actually be productive, I guess.
So it's interesting. I was just reading about some history of this actually happening to people. There was a guy, I forget his name now. I should have written it down. But a leader in KKK circles, and he went to a liberal arts college to get his credentials. You know how sometimes creationists go and get a biology degree so they can say, I am a PhD in biology and I say evolution is bullshit, that kind of thing. But some of his fellow students figured out who he was, and that he was I'm not sure if neo-Nazi is the same as KKK. Are they the same thing?
KKK are white supremacists.
Okay.
So like in a historical context, no, they're not the same. But I mean, there's definitely, I would say, there's quite a bit of overlap between what people consider neo-Nazism and the KKK.
Yeah. So he was a white supremacist, and when his fellow students found out, instead of attacking him, the Jewish students started inviting him over for dinner. And after several months of this, and he went. And after several months of this, he broke down and realized that he'd been told lies the whole time. And he dropped out and became a normal person and started fighting against the fascists. Which, I mean, it was interesting. There were 3 or 4 different cases like that. And obviously that's not going to happen all the time. But it can happen. And the important part isn't necessarily that you're trying to convince the neo-Nazi to change his mind, because you're probably not going to convince him with an argument any more than you're going to convince him with a punch. But at least that prevents society from devolving into riots in the streets like they had in, Weimar, Germany, before the big rise. And you are having the conversation for the people around that are looking and seeing, are these people on the left who proclaim tolerance and peace among mankind just as bad as the right wing that they say they hate? By as soon as they see someone who they violently disagree with, they go right into the punching and the killing, just like the Nazis do? Or do they actually stand by their principles and try to talk things out? And I think that is the greater effect of the punch, that it not only does it degrade the rule of law and bring the inevitable cold civil war we're having to a more hot civil war area, but it also further polarized the two sides.
I see what you're saying. I think for me, it's less about changing the individual's mind, and like you said, it's about the crowd. So if somebody posts some disgusting article, I mean, if it's a small 200-person community, you can pretty much just ignore it and let them just have their crazy little club. But, if for whatever reason it makes it to a popular read magazine or something, you can write a response. You don't have to call the guy and try and talk to him on the phone and change his mind. That might not work. And I'm using male terms because I'm thinking of I guess we can be more inclusive if you want. This might be a situation where the exclusivity is fine.
Well, the two sides that we're thinking about right now are Richard Spencer and the guy that punched Richard Spencer.
Right.
So,
yeah. But so if you can't change this person's mind, which might not even be worth attempting, you can write a response if you're worried that anyone's taking this person seriously, rather than send an assassin to his house. again, I wanted to make my peaceful discourse stance very clear before I say that all the arguments that sound like in favor of hitting Richard Spencer or similar people sound also like arguments for killing him. And it seems to me that killing him would have more advantages for the people making some of these arguments. Like it'll freak them out. It'll make them afraid to go outside and just, espouse these terrible beliefs, thin their numbers.
So you're just using fear as a deterrent, basically.
So I guess hitting them would be, fear and some physical threat as deterrent. But if you're serious about it, then it sounds like you might as well just start killing them. I'm not saying that, again, I want to make 100% clear, I'm not advocating that, but it sounds like it's a really easy slide from saying we should literally beat them into submission to where they're scared to go outside and say their stupid things, to where we should just make it so they can never do those things again. Right?
And who have we become when we're the ones resorting to those tactics?
Not the good guys.
Right.
Well, sure. Yeah. No. I mean, so you mentioned it was a black bloc member. Is that a descriptive term for anarcho-communist groups, or is that specifically the name of a group? Because I'm actually not terribly well versed in that.
I just heard about them actually the last few days, but from what I can tell, they are a specific group. Okay.
I'd be curious to know if anyone claiming to represent them has made a statement of what their intent was by, like, what was that actually their intent was to be like, we need to deter these guys by using fear, or was it to send a message, like you said, play the audience a little bit, or maybe not play the audience, but send a message to the audience?
It could have literally just been a happenstance occurrence where it's like, hey, it's that fucking asshole that wants to kill a bunch of people.
Right.
Here I am. I don't have anything harder than my fist. Let's just go hit him.
Sure, that
and
could
I
be
could
it
too.
too.
And I could totally see that. So it might not have been a reasoned attack.
There might not have been. But I mean, if like hypothetically, if there were, could it, what would it be? Would it be like, these guys are extreme? It may have to involve violence at some point in time. Hey, look, I can do it. You can do it too. I don't know.
That is one of the slightly more persuasive arguments that I've seen, is that once fascism has taken root to the point where the government is on the side of the Nazis, it's kind of a little late to fight. I mean, at that point, it's obvious who you should be fighting, and you take up guns and form revolutionary cells, but you want to prevent it from getting to that point if you can. And this is a way to draw a line in the sand and saying, no, we're not going to tolerate this at any cost.
So would you say one of the better ways to prevent it is by going through the motions of a civil society where we don't automatically resort to violent acts?
Yes, that is my contention.
Okay.
That the prohibition on private political violence is basically what makes civilization possible. You cannot have any sort of civilized society until you have this agreement that you do not use violence for political purposes if you are not actually acting as the state, as a cop who's on the job, or as a soldier who's fulfilling his duty. You do not get to use violence to make political points if you are just a guy out in the street, because otherwise we revert back to a state of chaos, and then no one is safe. I mean, I'm not trying to use this as a way to defend Nazis, because I hate Nazis, I assume, as much as anybody, although now I'm sure other people will be saying that I don't hate them at all. But there's, God, who was it? Sir Thomas More, I think it was, once said that a man who was a really awful man, everyone hated him, but he didn't commit a crime, should be let free. And one of his friends said, "You're giving him the benefit of the law here? This is an awful person." He's like, "I would give the devil the benefit of the law if the devil didn't commit a crime." And the guy says, "Really? You would let the law protect the devil? I would cut a path through the law to get to the devil. I would clear cut all of law to get to the devil." And Thomas More said, "Well, then what do you have left protecting you? Once all the laws are gone, the devil can turn around and attack you just as easily." So laws are what protect us from this state of chaos, and I think we do a lot of harm to society when we decide that certain laws are no longer applicable. And right now, I think it is far more harm than these few hundred Nazis can do to our society.
But what about special exceptions? So I'm with you.
Okay.
And so if Thomas More's interlocutor was like, no, I'm only going to break the law for literally the devil. So what I could imagine someone saying, no, I'm behind you. We should have people allowed to say, whatever, that the earth is flat or something. But calling for genocide, or discussing it like it's a topic on the table even. Maybe not saying, all right, everyone grab your guns, Friday is when it starts. That, I think, is at the point where you're allowed to intervene.
Right,
I think
yeah.
there's a big call between saying, the world would be a lot better place if this certain demographic of people was all dead, and saying, all right, guys, grab your guns, we're going to make it happen. I think at the minute that you start advocating for an actionable plan, then you've crossed a line. But they might say, just to backpedal a little bit, I'm going to draw a special exception for literally Nazis.
I'm talking to a person who says the world would be a much better place if Nazis were gone off the face of the planet.
That sounds like scary rhetoric, though.
Well, right, but he's the guy who's pro-punching Nazis.
Yeah, no, I guess I see what you're saying, and then it just occurred to me that the response... So I like my arguments to be generalizable.
Yeah, this is
about Nazis for any other group, and that suddenly turns into a really dark sentence, right?
Right.
Well, right. And it's like that's kind of it almost seems abstract, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, of course the world. I mean, I'm sure the world would be a better place if we didn't have people advocating. All the people who advocated for genocide didn't exist in whatever capacity that might mean. But there's a lot more nuance to it, right? Because who are those people? Which people are you talking about?
Right.
Also, you're advocating for the genocide of those people.
I mean, that's true also. But I mean,
I'm not sure if anyone gets tripped up there or not, but that is seems like a weird contradiction.
It's also how you define genocide or eugenics, because I am a strong advocate for, once the technology is there, sterilizing everybody at birth in a reversible manner, and once they hit the age of majority, letting them get that reversed as long as they petition. All they got to do is ask. No IQ test or any of that other bullshit. If you want to not be sterilized anymore, we reverse it for free on the spot.
You just want to make basically family planning not have to be a plan, or have to be an opt-in rather than an opt-out.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And there are people who would call me a eugenicist for doing that. And that suddenly makes me a Nazi.
And you're not saying they have to pass a test. Like you said, they don't have to pass a test. They don't have to write a big check. So they don't have to fit in any demographics. They just have to, I guess, have access to the internet or a phone or something.
And there are Christians who say that abortion is genocide.
Yeah.
And that
Wait, how would that be? How does that follow? What would their reasoning be? I've definitely never heard that one before.
Disproportionate number of people who get abortions are poor, and this is being provided at Planned Parenthoods that are supported by the government. And so they're saying that the government is setting up baby murder shops in inner cities to let the black people wipe themselves out. They're saying that the fact that we support Planned Parenthood means that we are supporting black genocide.
That sounds like a bottom line reasoning. Like they're against, like that doesn't sound like the kind of position you'd come to organically. It sounds like they're already against abortion, and they're trying to think, what is the best way we can make a punch?
And I would like to be able to counter-argue these people and say, no, you're wrong, and here's why, as opposed to being afraid to leave my house because of the gangs that are going to be roaming around beating me for being genocidal.
Yeah.
I mean,
are we being way too charitable if we assume that people should be able to differentiate between your position and certain Christians calling you a Nazi versus people like Richard Spencer, who are very overtly,
the world is full of fucking idiots.
Right. Like I said, is that maybe that is charitable, I guess, but
how it's not that hard to single someone out and get a mob going after them as long as you use the right buzzwords and can point to a few things that look
I suppose not.
Bad. Yeah.
Well, and I guess also the concern that you're putting forward this whole time is that the second that we say it's okay to start doing that for some groups, who knows how long that list can get.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part, right?
You can say it's okay to punch Nazis, but do we then have some sort of level of evidence? Do they get hauled into court where we prove that they're a Nazi? Or is it just once 51% of the populace thinks, yeah, he's probably a Nazi, then he's a Nazi? And do we take a poll? Is it just a general opinion? It reduces to whoever is the most willing to do violence to people they don't like.
Yeah, just has to be the one vigilante. They don't have to ask anybody.
Yeah. Sure, and I mean, I don't know, like there are definitely some people who are more extreme with the whole idea or the sentiment that yeah, we should totally just whoop ass on some Nazis, but then at least from what I've seen in my own personal Facebook feed, most people who are like, damn right, we should punch Nazis, are just kind of doing it from a signaling standpoint where they're just like, yeah, I'm all about justice. I'm all about doing the right thing. I hate these guys. They're evil. So, and I'm a good person. So
yeah,
fight evil people.
Yeah. I've seen
and there's a certain amount of emotional detachment because they're sitting here in their homes or at work with their computers in front of them. For a lot of them, it's kind of a, I don't know. I mean, it's a gesture. But
yeah, it's basically saying don't be evil and fight evil where you do see it, right? So it's meant in a good way, but I think that is the problem because no one is evil. And okay, that's not entirely true, but no one does evil for the sake of evil. They always do it because they think it's good. When
sure.
Richard Spencer says these things he says, he does it because he thinks he is saving the nation from, I don't even know what he's saving it from. And when people say it's okay to punch Nazis, they think that they are saving the nation from the next Holocaust, when really all they're doing is degrading the rule of law. The point is, people always think that they're doing good when they're doing evil, and that's why I'm not okay with just signing on to, yeah, sure, they're on our side, they're doing a good thing against evil. No, everyone thinks that they're doing good. That's why you have the laws that stop things like actual violence, that draw a line at bodily harm.
I was trying to think of parallels that might serve as intuition pumps. Like the public consciousness might be pro-fighting ISIS. Mm-hmm. Would they be pro-fighting ISIS sympathizers at home? Mm-hmm. Would they be so if someone in America shares a pro-ISIS meme on their Facebook, is it okay to hit them when they're in public?
Exactly.
So I guess that sort of seems to be the takeaway, that once you open this door at all, there's no keeping it from swinging all the way open. I guess there's no bulwark to say, no, this is exactly where we stop. It's okay to hit just these people, unless you're going to you're going to sound a lot like, God, is this a bad comparison? You're going to sound a lot like Nazis and say, no, we're not pro-killing the public, just the Jewish public, right?
Well, it's, Nazis in film and literature, they're like the de facto bad guys. They're just
Mm-hmm.
there they exist to be the bad guys that you feel okay enacting harm upon. Right?
Absolutely.
Like, I think it's a good idea to take a problem where you have just one example, then expand it, right? Like what you're doing with the whole ISIS example. But Nazism has this. I'm going to use the word advantage, but hopefully you know what I mean. It's got a historical context. It's very easy to just be like, to write them off entirely and other them.
Yeah. Nazis are the go-to example of like the baby eating monsters.
100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Absolutely.
That's one of the reasons I kind of think we just shouldn't use Nazis as a thing we label people who aren't literally part of the Nazi party.
Yeah. It does carry a lot of baggage.
Well, not just that it carries baggage, but it literally makes you subhuman and okay to kill.
Oh yeah, that too.
Yeah, you don't have any rights because you're just so evil. You've already screwed up.
Right, which I would be okay with if they actually were a Nazi. Like, I see the pictures of Indiana Jones punching a Nazi, and people are like, we should punch Nazis, and no one points out that about 30 seconds later, Indiana Jones murders that Nazi. When you see pictures of Captain America punching Hitler, people don't point out that we were out there to murder Hitler, and we're glad he's dead. The 1940s German Nazis do deserve to be killed, and that's why they make such great villains. But calling anyone a Nazi automatically reverts into that subhuman status, and so I'm really reluctant to do it.
Yeah, I guess if you want to come out and raise your hand and say, I'm a Nazi, then you're welcoming all of that filtering, I guess. But I don't know what to say about that. I don't know. I have a short list of notes here, and most of it, I've labeled it confusion, upsides, downsides. And the confusion takes up the bulk of the page. Downsides is a few bullet points, and then the upsides is just two little things. I'm like, what could be the point of doing this is really what I'm trying to think of. I guess it is just to shut down terrible discourse. So no one wants these people to have a microphone except in principle, right? So maybe that's the litmus test, is that, unless we're talking abstractly, no one actually wants to give these people a platform.
Well, I mean, yeah, like earlier, Inuyasha mentioned the Westboro Baptist Church. Like, what is the worst thing that they've ever said? They're mostly, like, they've said things about the LGBT community, basically, right? And mostly about God not liking them or hating them.
Yes.
Is that like the worst they've ever done? Is just go around and say those things?
They've done a lot of things. They're probably now most famous for picketing the soldiers of, or the funerals of soldiers.
Oh, right.
Because God hates America because America loves fags or something. So
sure. So that kind of stuff. Right, and then you have people like Richard Spencer who say substantially worse things. Like, and I know this was from an internet Wayback Machine. I haven't seen what he's said recently, but all signs seem to point to hardcore white nationalist / possible Nazi.
I'm
salutes and all that imagery aside.
Aside from the subhumanness, I'm actually okay saying that he probably signs on to Nazi ideology. Yeah,
sure. The only real direction I was going with that was just that, like, it seems like what he's saying is people in his group is substantially worse than even what the Westboro Baptist Church says.
Okay,
but then again, that's kind of hard to compare those two things.
Well, I think, so the Westboro Baptist Church, so far as I know, and I don't know a lot, I think they make claims that, homosexuality is the worst thing ever and people who are gay are terrible. But I don't think they're literally saying...
But they don't advocate for killing them.
Yeah, so I think that's might be the line that some people draw.
They don't advocate for killing them explicitly, but they do say that
they'd be okay with it?
Yeah, they do say that homosexuals deserve to die. That they should
They're just not going to do it.
But yes. But even that quote earlier from alternativeright.com was more explicit than that.
Right.
It was like entertaining the questions like, how might the world be better without these group of people? Will lead to enlightenment and flourishing thought.
Westboro Baptist does say that about gays. That the world would be better and more enlightened without them, and they should all be gone.
That's interesting. So why are all these people that are pro-punching Spencer pro-punching every Westboro Baptist person?
I would assume so if they were consistent, but they very strongly say only Nazis.
Yeah, I guess there's like we keep talking about. There's this magical category for Nazis.
It's topical, and I'm willing to bet that they wouldn't necessarily say that same thing about the Westboro Baptist Church.
Mm-hmm. They specifically said they don't say that about the Westboro Baptist Church when I talked to them.
Okay. Side note: Alternative Right, the website, did that precede Breitbart? I mean,
I don't remember how long ago it was.
Okay. Because you mentioned that Richard Spencer is like more or less the founder of the alternative right movement.
I'm not sure if the entire movement, but it seems that the name alt-right came from his coinage from his website.
Okay.
And he's certainly a big name in the movement, which is interesting because none of us have ever heard of him before a few months ago, right?
Yep. No, the first time I saw him was when he was in that hotel saying, "Hail Trump, hail our people," and everyone was throwing up the salute.
Stephen just said we don't want to give him a platform, but no one has ever given him a platform. The only platform he gets is when he does things so outrageous on camera that the news says, "Oh my God, look at how outrageous this is."
Kind of like Milo Yiannopoulos.
Yes, exactly. And like the Westboro Baptists. They only get coverage when they're so fucking crazy that the media says, look how crazy they are. He doesn't have any sort of a job at a newspaper or anything.
Of course, in Milo's case, I mean, he's more like an alt-right troll, right? He's there to be an entertainer. He's there to stir people up and, be inflammatory, and paint the left in as bad a light as he possibly can and misconstrue their points and so on and so forth.
Is it bad that I'm sometimes entertained by Milo?
No, I mean he's a witty guy. Like he's clearly, he seems like an intelligent person at the very but he's directing his wits toward being an asshole, basically.
Yeah. I apparently need to get out more. I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
Oh, he's another alt-right celebrity.
Yeah, he's associated with Breitbart.
Yeah, and he got his was he the first Twitter person that got his Twitter purged?
Yeah, well, he was. Yeah, he got banned from Twitter for being just so controversial all the time. But I mean, I think it was more than just that. I'm just giving kind of like a really basic view of it. But
you're saying he's the first person to get banned from Twitter?
Well, not entirely, but there was a bit of a purge not too long ago of various alt-right Twitter trolls, and I think he was the first one in that wave, right?
I see.
Yeah, it was like back in June or something like that. And now of course he's using that to his advantage. He's standing up and being like, well, I wouldn't go back to Twitter even if they begged me to, and so on. So he looks like this awesome martyr for the alt-right or whatever it is. But yeah, no, most of the concerns around Milo, what he talks about when he's invited to, speak at a campus by the Republican Club or whatever. I believe there was a bit of a controversy about him outing a trans person at a...
Oh, I did hear about this guy.
Right, yeah, like he named...
What's the person's last name?
Yiannopoulos. So it's
that's the person that was at University of Washington on Friday.
Yes. So
that's who this was about. That's why. Yeah. Okay.
It's like YIANN.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
So now we've come full circle. All right.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So like he was. I forget which university he was speaking at, but he named a trans person that was attending that college and showed a picture of this person, and a lot of people viewed that as essentially an act of violence, endangering the life of that person by outing them and making it known that they were trans.
Yeah, that was actually in the article that I was reading here. That's why it sounded so familiar.
Yeah.
I'm trying to scroll through and find the name of the school, but it's not super important. Guys, it sounds like a total dick.
What do we think about the argument that some speech can be violence?
So, I guess then we kind of fall back on. So.
That's what a lot of people who are in favor of Nazi punching would say, definitely.
And Sean, you gave the example,
self-defense against violence.
The classic example of yelling fire in a movie theater.
Yeah.
In John Stuart Mill's On Liberty short book, basically the Bible for libertarians, But it's a short enough read. You can read it in half an hour or an hour if you're slow like me. The sentence that encapsulates the whole thesis of the book is the freedom to swing my fist ends where your face begins. And the whole idea is that I can do whatever I want as long as I'm not hurting other people. And consenting adults can do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting other people. The example that he gives as far as speech that might be somewhat relevant is that apparently it was common for corn farmers to stock all their harvest and then basically ransom it out and say, oh no, we're super short. We're going to have to hike up sales a lot. And that was the analogy that he gave. And he was saying that it would be perfectly acceptable for somebody to have a town meeting and hand out flyers and say the town corn farmer might be trying to fuck us, or, this is a bad establishment that allows this to happen. It wouldn't be appropriate to have that conversation on the lawn of the town corn farmer and get everyone all riled up and hating on this group of people, or just there's a reasonable expectation that could happen. Mm-hmm. And so that's even where Mill was ready to say, you know what, I'm ready to draw the line on free speech there. So I guess I don't like this is going to maybe sound somewhat annoying to somebody, but I don't like the idea of saying speech is violence. I think if speech is violence, then what's violence?
So it's indirect, right? It's not like the words are actually physically harming people, obviously, but it's that those words can lead to acts of violence. Like in the case of people who are marginalized or oppressed, right?
Oh, so it can lead to actual physical violence,
right? Well, like the whole idea was like again, like if Milo Yiannopoulos goes to a college campus and outs a trans person, that's potentially a violent act because there are people that would do that trans person harm.
Okay, I see.
The idea is that
you don't dox people.
Right. Right. It's an invasion of privacy, and you never know who might be willing to commit acts of violence with that knowledge, right?
Yeah.
But that also potentially gets into a bit of a gray area / slippery slope type thing.
So, okay, so I guess I'll rescind my comment on speech not being, I guess, so no one's saying that the words themselves are violence.
Oh, no.
They're saying that
No.
it's that it leads to violence, and that's a bad thing. And that's obviously a fair concern.
Okay, so personal story time again. I can kind of understand the statement that threats are violence in themselves, because when I lived at a different place once, and one of my neighbors was kind of an asshole, and he would get drunk a lot. And one time I was out, and I got a call from my SO saying that the guy just yelled over from his porch, "I'm going to go over there and shoot all of you." And I freaked the fuck out. And I literally got lost driving home. Oh, it was like I was 10 minutes away because I was so out of my mind with both rage and, that when you want to kill someone, that sort of the shock of it, that I couldn't drive straight. I didn't know where I was, but I finally got home. And if he would have been there, like out front in front of our doors, it took me a few days to get over that, because hearing someone that you love threatened like that,
yeah,
it feels like violence. And I can totally understand someone who is in a targeted minority, someone who's black or Jewish, hearing we should consider black genocide, being not physically, but psychologically harmed by that, feeling like they've been assaulted.
Very, very emotionally impactful, right?
Yeah.
And it makes the idea of hitting them seem super sympathizable.
Fuck yes, it does.
Yeah. No.
I mean, I understand why he was hit. The thing that I'm upset about is how many people are cheering this on and saying, yes, this is a thing we should do.
Yeah, and not a lot of them, and not everyone who advocates for punching a Nazi is putting it in the terms that we're putting it. They're not exactly presenting the most nuanced. They're using, again, internet pathos, right? They're showing images of Captain America. They're showing images of Indiana Jones. They're saying, well, of course it's okay to punch those people, but they're also very removed from it. A lot of them are not. Like a lot of the people I've seen who advocate for it are not necessarily members of a marginalized group, but they're oftentimes people who are sympathetic with people who are marginalized. They're very social justice minded, I guess. For them, it might make a certain degree of sense. Like, yeah, of course, these are the people who are going to be hurt by this. Their scale of violence is not the same as ours.
Yeah.
and thus, so maybe on some level they don't want like an axiomatic view of how a civil society works to get in the way of protecting the marginalized people, right? They see themselves. I mean, I don't want to say like saviors, but like like people who are
the warrior and social justice warrior.
Yeah,
Oh,
they,
yeah,
they
sure,
are here stopping
sure.
the Holocaust from coming on our shores.
right.
No, I mean, I understand that, but I would assume, and I'll get into a comparison here in a second, if you're worried about violence against your group, wouldn't you want the laws to be strong and strictly enforced? Because the problem comes from when there are lynch mobs and there are people being beaten in the streets and the cops being okay with that. Being like, yeah, no, he's a Nazi, or yeah, no, he's a Jew, so it's totally okay. This guy can threaten people, and yes, that is frightening and that is infuriating, but as long as you know that if he tries to come after you, the cops and the rest of society will be there to stop that, I think that is a stronger protection than going out and punching people and starting fights in the streets.
Yeah, I think. Well, you definitely have a point. I guess I would say that there are some marginalized groups who don't feel that the law has their best interest in mind, and that's kind of a whole other can of worms, or that's a rabbit hole. And I'll admit I'm not. I read about these things sometimes, but I don't necessarily feel like. And there's a certain level I can't really speak to it on, I guess.
I guess that comes back to the whole efficacy point, because one of the people I was talking with was big into the punk scenes in the in the 90s.
Oh, and let me get like not neo-Nazis showed up to those.
Yeah.
And they were like, the only way to deal with them is to just punch them out and get them out of there.
Exactly.
I've seen that before, yeah.
Yeah, that the only way to deal with them is to resist physically and let them know that they will be beat if they come to these spaces.
Yeah, they're talking about skinheads who'd show up to punk shows and stuff, yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Like just to listen to the music or to be dicks?
Both.
I wasn't around for that scene. I was way too young.
It's loud, thrashy music. It appeals to people who have a lot of, testosterone, want to fight on both sides. And so they would be a danger to bystanders. They would overwhelm the bouncer's ability to take care of the venue. And it quickly became a social norm that you punch Nazis. That was just, you see a Nazi, you punch a Nazi, you get them the fuck out of there, or they're going to ruin everything and make the place dangerous for people. And in that case, I totally sympathize, because a club like that is already an anarchistic, lawless environment. The police don't come in there, and they don't care about fights in punk clubs. They're like, whatever, you white kids beat the fuck out of each other.
So it's like this microcosm of like a no man's land,
exactly.
Right?
And in those cases, you do need that sort of violence. And in that case, I would be a proponent of doing that. But I don't think we have that situation on the streets of New York. I mean, as you pointed out, there are serious problems with how law enforcement is done in this country, and how it is in many places anti-minority. And I can see how they would feel like they're not being protected by the law, and so they do have to take things into their own hands.
Right. They don't have that same confidence that you and I might have.
Exactly.
In the same situation, So I guess like I just wanted to bring that up as like I want to acknowledge that that's a thing. In general.
That's an important thing. I'm wondering how to engage it. I guess.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat.
Yeah, I mean,
ideally, the best way to engage it is to make the law be actually just and the law enforcement be just. But
right, easier said than done.
Not an ideal world. Yeah.
Race relations are not where they need to be yet.
Right.
I did have a sort of lateral move I wanted to discuss at least briefly.
Sure.
In Germany, and at least Germany, some other parts of the UK maybe, it's against the law to express beliefs of Holocaust denial.
Yes.
Oh,
And
that's right. I did hear about that.
I wonder if someone might say, well, okay, fine, we don't have to hit them, we just make it against the law to say that, we want to kill black people or something.
I would actually be okay with that.
I have a mixed position on this.
I would rather that there be a law that singles out something that everyone in society agrees is horrific and should not be tolerated, and have it actually be codified as part of our laws, rather than having this anarchistic vigilante justice.
Well, if you had to pick, sure, between random vigilante justice and a law to prevent that expressed belief. But for me, the best counter-argument I heard to this law in the UK is that if you're the kind of idiot who is a Holocaust denier, by all means, put that on your Facebook or say it in front of a TV camera and let everyone know how fucking stupid you are. and then that way we can all update our opinions about you accordingly. Whereas if you can't even express that belief, then, you know, you might be friends with some idiot, Holocaust denier, and not even know it, right? Because they can't express that belief to you. So, I mean, if you say, well, you can't share Pepe the Frog memes because it's whatever supportive of this shitty demographic of assholes, well, then they're going to just have some other maybe secret signs or something. But then, for all you know, you're going to be friends with these people. And I guess if it never came up, then all the better. But it seems like I'd be kind of in favor of you going out there and letting everyone know how dumb you are. And the laws that might impede that, I can see their utility, but I wonder if that's worth the cost. It might be. I'm not really super tied to that belief, but it is an interesting counterpoint.
Yeah, I'm wondering how you would make that actionable. Like you're saying, have a law where it's illegal to basically talk about genocide or to advocate for it or something.
Maybe
like
advocate for it. I mean, I think I wouldn't want to make a law like
In that case, if someone publishes a website saying we should seriously consider black genocide, you would pull them into court. You would say, look, here is the website. Here's his name on it. Here's the picture he posted. Send him to jail for 2 years or however long it is. Or slap him with a $10,000 fine. I don't know what the case may be.
That sounds appropriate. I wanted to at least, because we've done a lot of, I think, kicking back against the pro-punch position. What should people be doing instead? That strikes me as a very important question that I'd like to at least consider, but I don't really have a good answer.
What's the question?
What should we do instead to people,
instead of
like
punching
Richard Spencer and that community? Since we're mostly not in favor of hitting them in the street randomly. And I guess to me, I get my main concern too. I have a hard time thinking of like not worst case scenarios as far as, in this case, like collateral damage. I imagine like throwing a brick through his window and killing a toddler. Like, I mean, you know, so would they say, well, fuck it, that toddler? You know, I imagine some people would rationalize it and say, well, that was
people
that was
have been
baby
rationalizing
Nazi.
all kinds of.
So
yeah.
Any social movement that that could plausibly lead to the death of innocent people, like that kid at University of Washington got shot. I think he's been moved from critical to serious condition, but that could have very easily killed him, and it still might, right? So, like, I guess if you're gonna say, yeah, I'm totally down with violence against these people, you're better be prepared to say this is the amount of false positivism we're ready to tolerate.
What was the shooting at the University of Washington that you're referring to?
Oh, that kid had a anti-swastika tattoo.
Oh,
and
that
it
one
looked like a swastika tattoo.
Right. Okay. Right.
So I mean, you know, reasonable error if your goal is saying I'm going to kill Nazis.
That's just a false positive we got to accept.
Yeah.
I
mean, rough tattoo choice, but I'm not going to. Obviously, it's not that person's fault, and no one should be shot for having any sort of tattoo. So, I guess if we're not in favor of saying, yeah, hit them in the street, what are we in favor of? What would be a better way to engage these assholes? Or just ignore them? If there's 200 people, I'm kind of in favor of ignoring them.
Discrediting them as much as possible, disrupting them, being really just like not inviting them to anything. Don't let them go into your private spaces at the very least.
Yeah, that's obviously the first step.
I don't know, shame them, shout them down. Like, there's all kinds of non-physically violent ways. I mean, you could be aggressive with them and yell at them until they go away.
Argument gets counter-argument is always my thing, because they are just wrong about society being worse off when it's multicultural and diverse. And that's pretty fucking obvious to most people. There's a reason that there's only a few hundred of them and they've been losing for decades in this country. And I think, you know, first of all, giving the counter argument, but also, as you're saying, pointing out that they're violent, evil assholes drives people away. Sometimes reaching out to some of them. And I talked earlier about the guy who was invited to Jewish dinners. There was another guy who was had a swastika tattoo on his face. And was
like on his forehead, or
it didn't say where exactly on his face it was, but swastika tattoo on his face, really down on his luck, and he was moving furniture to make ends meet, and a rich Jewish guy hired him, and he was like, well, I hate this guy, but I really need to eat and pay rent, so I'll move the furniture. And afterwards, the Jewish guy tipped him very well and said, "You were awesome. Do you want to come back and help me next week?" He was like, yeah, okay, sure. And eventually they got a pretty good rapport, and the guy also dropped out of the Nazi movement. And when he asked the Jewish guy, hey, why did you hire me when I had a swastika?
Right.
He's like, well, you were a good worker, and you looked like you were down on your luck and needed some work. And I said, sure, why not? And I was like, first of all, props to that Jewish guy. I would not have
Seriously,
hired that guy.
I don't know what I would do in that situation.
Yeah, but he broke down those barriers, and that was amazing. But so there's that. There's just mocking them. I will link to a podcast about how the KKK was taken down by Superman.
Oh, that's a great one.
Yeah.
I love the
okay.
story.
It sounds interesting.
Oh, well, it's fantastic. They had someone infiltrate the KKK, and they always have their secret meetings where they have their special robes and they talk in codes and all this. And
Ridiculous codes too, like Grand Dragon and all the stuff that you'd imagine kids would play with.
yeah, and the guy who
The secret
infiltrated
club, the secret KKK club.
Yeah, it was seriously like boys in a treehouse having their secret club, and just the focus of is we really hate black people. Now let's have our fun weekend activity or whatever. Let's go bowling.
With a side of impotent rage.
Yes, yeah. But the guy worked for a radio program, a Superman program. Was this the 40s, 30s? It was before TV was big.
Yeah,
Radio was the
something
big
like
thing.
that.
Okay, so yeah, 40s probably.
Yeah, and he leaked all this information to the guys working on the Superman program, and Superman started fighting the KKK in the program. And the KKK, they would reveal all their secret codes. They would just make them look ridiculous. They would point out that these are just dumb guys in a treehouse, basically. And the people who were in the KKK, their kids listened to the Superman show. And they would start running around the playground playing Superman versus the KKK.
That's brilliant.
Yes.
What
and
podcast is this? Because this is all sounding like exactly like I just heard this very recently.
I think it may have been Radiolab. Maybe
feel
it was
like
This American Life.
I'm not sure. I actually
No,
don't
it
listen.
was probably This American Life.
I don't actually listen to either of those. I feel like I saw this in a documentary or something very like within the last month because this is all very fresh for me.
Yeah,
but yeah,
and
it's hilarious.
They were basically shamed out of being the KKK because it was pointed out how ridiculous and dumb they are.
Sure.
And after that, the KKK, I mean, it was still a thing, but it became far less powerful. So there's that. There is a group called Indivisible, and they have a website, indivisibleguide.com, I believe it is, but I'll double check that. And they are posting all sorts of things on how you can resist the Trump administration in a peaceful and possibly effective way. Things you can do, how you can contact your Congress creators, how you can put political pressure on things from your own district at home. And I will link that as well. But there's a lot of nonviolent things that people can do, and that I think would be more effective than trying to be violent.
Sure. The other thing, I guess, yeah, some of the people in favor of, like, yeah, it's okay to, punch Nazis, have said that, well, it's not really violence because people like Richard Spencer they're the ones, they're the oppressors, they're the bad guys, it's kind of that whole thing. I'm probably not presenting it very well, but I've seen this on a couple of friends' walls where they basically say, I'm a pacifist, I'm against violence, but doing this is not violence. Which is, I mean, I don't entirely agree with that, but it's mostly a semantic thing.
I also think they vastly overestimate how much power he has.
And that's entirely right. And I mean, I think, like, again, it kind of ties into, like, social justice movements where, like, any form of oppression where if you're a member of society that holds the card, so to speak, then some of your actions can be construed as violence, whereas some other ones might not be, even if on the surface they appear as such.
But the guy that punched him was also an able-bodied white male.
Oh yes, no, I'm aware. yeah, no, I'm just, I was kind of grasping at straws for that one because this is me just trying to like here are some arguments I've seen. Like, they're not necessarily arguments that I agree with, but this is some of the rhetoric that I've seen kicked down, and that was very incomplete as far as that goes.
Argument, because it seems to me like the social justice left has a fair amount of power.
Well, yeah, no, I mean
certainly more than Richard Spencer does, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you might say that. I mean, here's the other thing, and this is kind of another, like,
I mean, a guy got away with punching a man in the street.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, it's just like, and I think this happens sometimes in general with people who are very fired up and fervent about these ideas of social justice, is that the have a tendency to conflate the idea of systemic power with individual power, where it's like, if you commit an act of violence or you do something against someone on an individual level, things like racial discrimination will cut all directions if you're talking about one-on-one or in small groups. On a systemic level, obviously that doesn't quite play out the same way. But people sometimes seem to just kind of say, like, they'll look at a pattern and they'll be like, well, this involved a person of this color and this involved a person of this other color, so therefore that wasn't actually racist. That wasn't racially motivated. So, I mean, that might be where some of that comes from.
Speaking of weird rhetoric, there is a great subreddit called Change My View, where somebody put forward, in the title of the thread their position, and then they'll defend it as many paragraphs as it takes, and then people will try and talk them out of it, and in good faith, they tend to engage. In fact, if the original poster doesn't respond within 3 hours to the original, to comments coming in, the thread gets removed. So it demands open, actual discourse.
I think Change My View is another wonderful way to fight this sort of thing without punching people.
I just was reading one today. Somebody said it was basically taking your position. They had your position. They were being called a Nazi by their Facebook friends because they were a Nazi sympathizer, because they were saying you shouldn't hit Nazis. And he's like, I'm not saying you shouldn't hit Nazis. I'm saying you shouldn't hit anybody, including Nazis. Anyway, so there were, the further down you go, obviously, just like with every sorted comment thread, the worse the arguments get. And they got to be kind of dumb along the lines of well, at what point are you allowed to hit him? If there's some guy marching around with a gun saying, I'm going to shoot black people, do you hit him then? Do you wait till he takes aim?
You pin him down and you call the cops.
You immediately.
So that's a credible threat of violence.
Yeah,
definitely.
So I think there
are some times when punching is appropriate.
Yeah. And so some of these were kind of dumb, but the point they were trying to make, but poorly, was where is the line? When is it okay to hit Spencer? I think I'll put forward my own idea on it, and it was what I said earlier, which is when it changes from talking about the notion as kind of just a circle jerky little thing about, we have our little fringe belief, let's sit here and engage about it back and forth to our little community, and saying, all right, guys, grab your guns, we're going to go do this. I think the second that they make a plan.
So credible threat of violence, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as he actually were to single out a black person or a black neighborhood and say, let's start here, that is when you intervene.
So I guess that was a pretty quick answer. I thought it might be a conversation, but I think that's a fair thing. I think maybe the concern come back to that could be something along the lines of, what if they don't say, all right, guys, Friday night and it's Tuesday, they say, right now, let's go do this. And there's just not time. So is there any point where preemptive strike is appropriate? Mm-hmm. And I don't really have a good answer to that. I feel kind of like that's sort of the issue we've been talking about, that if you authorize preemptive strikes, you're going to get a lot of false positives. You're going to have a hard time pinning down when exactly it's okay.
I think there's definitely a point where preemptive strikes are appropriate, but that requires a huge burden of proof if you're advocating that sort of thing. If you're advocating being violent to someone else before they have been violent first, you better have a damn good reason. Yeah,
and what is sufficient evidence for that in that case where you simply just don't have enough information? Actually, even without that, just what would sufficient evidence be in general? It's if it's a too little, too late thing where it's okay, we're just gonna hands off. Oh, suddenly some horrible thing happens. A bunch of people get lit up in a neighborhood, and it's maybe if we'd listened to all those Nazi puncher people, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And
I think that at least in the USA, maybe this is different in other countries, but at least in the USA, we are so far away from Nazis actually being a threat that we are far more, and we're not close to this either, but we are far closer to the threat of random mobs in the streets choosing people they don't like and beating them than we are to the fascists taking over and implementing their genocidal policies.
Sure. True to social media in general, there are people who are, catastrophizing certain things and kind of making this assumption that it's going to straight up be Third Reich all over again. Yeah.
Do we even need to point out that the Nazis got started by having mobs of vigilantes in the streets? They were not originally in power in Germany. They started out as groups of thugs and kids wandering the streets saying, the laws do not punish the Jews enough, we must do it more for them.
Right. They weren't completely peaceful, right? They actually did use violence in small groups.
They would punch people. They would beat people. They would even now and then kill people. But it started out with mobs beating someone that they thought was not being sufficiently punished by the government.
Right.
Which is what we have here, yes? A vigilante beating someone who he believes is not being sufficiently silenced by the government?
We have a distilled version of that, a weaker version.
Yeah.
Right now, we only got one guy.
Definitely.
Yeah, we had one guy.
Right.
There was. He ran after the punch because he knew he wouldn't get enough support from the crowd to stick around and hang out. So
and he also didn't want to get arrested.
Yeah. So it was a little different, but it does sound like a slippery slope to something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a slippery slope, but it's something that I would like to be on the lookout for. And the fact that people are gleefully cheering on the guy who is basically the small scale version of the brown shirts wandering the streets is what really horrifies me.
I think that's fair. I don't have much else to weigh in on that. I'm certainly open to civil counter-argument.
I do have one argument pro-punching that I really kind of respect, even though I don't want to.
What's that?
The argument is that there is no such thing as nonviolence or nonviolent action that is effective if there isn't a also violent action complementing it. That, for example, Gandhi would have failed in India if it wasn't for the fact that the British had just gone through a brutal world war and were militarily weakened and just didn't have the will to fight anymore. That the civil rights movement here in America would have never gone anywhere if it wasn't for the fact that there were Black Panthers burning places and carrying guns around. And that it originally, people, when they saw Martin Luther King, were just shocked and offended that he would do such a thing and ask for these concessions. And then the Black Panthers show up with their guns and their firebombs, and they realize, well, he's certainly much better than the Black Panthers, and we're going to have race riots on our hands, and we would rather deal with Martin Luther King than deal with these violent mobs. And that is one of the reasons I do think that violence sometimes is justified. It certainly was in that case when the law was on the side of terror as instead of on the side of order.
Right.
But it could be made, a claim could be made that this is serving the same function by having a minority who is violent and does that sort of thing. It gives more power to the non-violent groups, that all of a sudden people who were kind of on the sidelines before join into the nonviolent movement and push that stronger just because they want to avoid the violence getting out of control.
It makes the whole problem unignorable.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can't have that if you don't have some small minority that is doing the violence.
Do you think it also could mitigate greater acts of violence by, like, this relatively minor, like this guy throws an elbow and he runs away? If he is part of the argument also that, like, if that didn't happen, maybe something could have escalated into an even worse act of violence before people would react to it and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this?
Oh, I didn't hear that, but that is also a point. Yeah.
Just something that came to mind.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly raised my consciousness to the fact that there's even a population of neo-Nazis in the United States.
Okay.
Like, I probably am not a representative demographic of people who pay attention, so maybe I might be out of the loop on this one.
Well, I think you're probably rather basic American norm. I think you're actually more informed than the median American, which would make me think that most people didn't know that there was these neo-Nazi groups.
Probably less informed than the average listener, though.
Okay.
But, I mean, yeah, I suppose. I would have... I guess I knew that there were skinheads and people with swastika tattoos, but I thought it was mainly, like, prison gangs, you know, a few hundred people, and that apparently is what it is. But I wasn't aware that they had some TV time and that sort of nonsense, so certainly raised my consciousness to the problem, and if there's anything nonviolent that I can do that can help mitigate their publicity, I'd be down to do something like that I wouldn't have been able to do had you not told me that this happened. Right. So
it puts me in the bizarre mental position of wanting nonviolence and hating violence, but realizing that it may be a necessary thing that has to be there, and I don't want to admit that.
Speaking of nonviolence and Gandhi, just real quick, I have my bone to pick with Gandhian pacifism is that his whole approach wouldn't have worked if his enemy had been crueler. Right? So, like, the whole idea of, like, well, I'm going to be nonviolent only works, so, like, say if it's, you know, a small town, only works, like, on a personal level or a small subsection level until some person who's prepared to be violent will come and stop the aggressor, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a generalizable thing. I don't know. I guess it seems like they're dodging a hard question and just pushing the problem to somebody else.
If the occupational forces just didn't care and were willing to wipe everyone out, then
if they'd been the Nazis and,
exactly.
and not Britain, right?
Yeah.
So, and here we are back at Nazis.
Yep. Godwind. I mean, not really, because we've been talking about it since the very beginning, but you know what I mean.
That's right.
Do we have anything else?
So recently there was the Women's March, and I know that there's been talk about organizing mass scale protests every month. I'm very curious to see how that goes.
Marches are another wonderful way
Yeah.
to non-violently resist. And fucking
And-
good
and
on
the-
the
and the-
Women's March, the
dude.
largest in history. Like
Yes.
2.5 million people
Oh God, yeah, no, it's like
across the nation.
huge turnout. Like this is just to see how much of the country is resisting the new presidency
Yeah.
and marching in favor of women's rights. Like it's pretty amazing.
I had a little bit of my faith in humanity restored, just slightly, upon seeing that.
I went to the one in Denver for a few hours on Saturday morning, and it was
Awesome. How was that?
It was fun. I mean, there were fun signs. People, but what I really went to see was to kind of gauge the feeling of the crowd.
Yeah.
And I also really was looking to see if there were any counter protesters, and I didn't see anybody. I was wondering if there would be any sort of assaults against them or something. Which, I mean, you're kind of putting yourself out there to get your ass kicked if you're gonna go out there and I don't know. But I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying you're accepting that level of risk. But no, I didn't see anything like that. Everyone was cool. It was just. I tried to get up. I went up on like the hill at the Capitol building, and then when they moved to the 16th Street Mall, I went up to like the 3rd floor there, and just people as far as you could see. It was huge. But yeah, everyone was peaceful, and it was nice.
Dude, I wish I would have been there. At
I mean,
least
if-
for
if-
an hour or two.
Yeah,
you
if they're
know?
doing, if they're doing it again every, I
Yeah,
imagine turnout will probably diminish. But I guess people probably kept some of their signs. So yeah, fun stuff.
Good on you.
Yeah, I mean, it was more just curiosity. I don't even really know what their platform is.
Okay.
I did look it up, and they have like 6 rough platforms that they're like, well, we're pro-choice, or apparently anti-choice. There was a sentiment to where
Isn't anti-choice the same thing as pro-choice?
yes, but they were anti.
Anti someone else making the choice for you. You
What
mean?
am I
Or-
trying to say? They were anti. What's the other side called? They're anti-pro-life people. They explicitly didn't want them to come.
Oh.
There were some pro-life groups that reached out and said, "Hey, we want to support and join in on this." And then they were like, "Yeah, sure." And then people were like, "Are you fucking kidding? They're against our right to do stuff." Like, "Oh yeah, never mind, guys.
Yeah, that
We
doesn't
don't
make
want your support."
sense. Wait, yeah, I don't understand how a pro-life.
Well, because they're
You
all
can be
Advocate would-
pro-life and
you can be
against Trump still.
well, you
Oh,
can be-
sorry. Okay, I was talking about specifically like reproductive rights. Like how would they? Well, okay, it was a multi-purpose march, so that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot.
Okay.
Part of the march was, and that's the thing. The signs ranged from everything from "Trump has tiny hands" to
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
get your laws out of my vagina and stuff. And so
Right.
it wasn't like a unified purpose. But it was a general thing. And to me, it was mainly about the impression I got was that it wasn't so much about any of these specific platforms. There was also concern for LGBT immigrants and stuff like that. It was just solidarity with women. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a message I can get behind.
Yeah, no, it's anti-Trump and women's rights.
Yeah,
kind of
the anti-Trump
combined.
part was interesting. I mean, I don't have a fleshed out opinion on this, but it is interesting, like, the idea that we're going to rally against the democratic process. I mean, I'm probably more anti-democracy than the average person, but
I think they're No, I mean, well,
I
no,
think dissent is part of the democratic process, though.
it is part of the Democrat, and they're. I'd be willing to bet that it's less protesting the democratic process and more
The policies.
protesting specifically Trump and the policies that he has been enacting in the last. Well, the Women's March was that on the 21st?
Yeah,
it was that
Saturday.
whole weekend, right?
it was Saturday. Might have been the whole weekend, but I think the major was the 21st on Saturday.
But I don't know, like I haven't fact checked this 100%, but I mean supposedly there have been some policies signed off on by Trump already that are very troubling.
Unfortunately, I'm still kind of like coming to grips with this. I never really processed the possibility of him becoming president until like 9:30 on November 8th.
Yep.
And then
Right there with you.
right through Friday afternoon, I'm like, oh, someone will probably kill him at inauguration. It's like, maybe this won't actually happen. And then it did. And so like, then I'm getting, I don't know, 4 or 5 news articles a day where it's like, oh, President Trump signed in the Keystone Pipeline with an executive order.
Yeah.
President Trump signed that bill that every Republican signs that keeps American foreign aid from going to organizations that are pro-abortion.
Yeah, well,
So that might have been what you're thinking of. But that's the only anti-woman thing that I can think of that he's done so far.
yeah, is it the gag? It's like the gag rule. It's like if so much is mentioned.
Oh no, that's a domestic thing, and that's always
Okay.
been a symbolic. That goes back and forth. In fact, George Bush, the first paper he signed, Clinton, the first paper he signed,
Yeah,
Obama,
they keep undoing it and redoing it.
That doesn't actually do anything. This was specifically,
Okay.
the U.S. gives, I think, 0.018% of its GDP to foreign aid. This bill kept any of that money going to charities that help with like birth control or abortion or anything like that.
Okay.
So
Is it 0.18% of GDP or 0.18% of the
0.018% maybe
of GDP or of the government's budget?
government's budget.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
I'll double check. These were in our EA episode.
Okay.
They're in that also in Singer's "The Life You Can Save," his book.
Yeah, the shit that's been coming out of the Trump administration just in the last few
Terrifying.
days.
It still freaks me out. Like the fact that it's actually
Affordable
real.
Health Care Act.
The gagging the EPA.
Yep.
What the fuck?
Oh, yeah,
is that
yeah,
even
this
about?
is-
By Friday,
Well, he
the
bel-
climate change page on the Washington on White House website was gone.
Well,
Now
that
it's also no longer in Spanish, available in Spanish.
the reason for that, and I'm not saying that, you know, but anyway, no, the reason for that was the apparently we're clearing everything for the new administration. So like there's a new domain called ObamaWhiteHouse.gov that had all that original content. The Twitter account POTUS, President of the United States, was also moved to POTUS 44 because it had all of Obama's tweets.
Right.
So it was basically clearing the record for Trump to put whatever. I will say though, like regardless, I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't a climate change section there later or a LGBT section there later. I mean,
Well, we'll see if those things make a comeback. I'm kind of curious.
exactly. It's
If they do, that'd be nice. I don't know how everything else made it, and those didn't make the cut. But maybe they wanted to put their own spin on it, and not have Obama's spin.
they cleared all the main like the central content, everything but bare bones is
Okay.
basically what it was.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that there was some nuance to that. Well, fingers crossed that in the next couple of weeks they put their shit together.
Yeah.
And I can lighten my opinion a little bit.
No,
I'm hoping things.
like it's gone on record. Trump's gone on record saying that he thinks that climate change is a Chinese hoax meant to undermine our manufacturing base. So there's that.
That reminds me, my favorite sign at the rally. So I also just kind of enjoyed the experience of seeing like in public in a large crowd signs that had the word pussy and cunt on them, and like everyone loved them. My favorite sign though was a big blow up of one of Trump's tweets that was, "This is appalling. We should march on Washington to fight this travesty."
Nice.
It was when Obama was or either won the last election or was inaugurated, and
Perfect.
So someone was carrying that around. I thought that was my favorite sign.
I think my favorite cheeky statement about the whole Nazi punch thing is it wasn't a punch, it was an alt handshake.
Nice.
Damn,
Dude, how do you even come out and just nakedly assert things that can be proven false like within minutes?
really? I mean,
Seriously, I hate comparisons to 1984 because it's such a fucking cliche at this point.
Yeah, or like comparing the violent parts of the protest to like our nation's independence.
Yeah.
Completely different context.
But even just the fact that
Yeah.
they come out and say something which is nakedly false and easily provable so, and just stick to it anyway, it's
Yeah.
bizarre.
you know, part of it might actually be a calculated move. I mean, think about it. Everyone's talking about how what's his butt is saying that the crowd is biggest in history, and no one's talking about what Trump's actually doing.
Well, I'm seeing people
so-
talking about what he's doing too.
Some, but I think that
Yeah,
this is
there's-
that a large percentage of conversation is here talking about this obviously bullshit thing that's just there to, you know, throw this out to us to fight over and complain about for the next week while he goes off and does stupid shit, which I mean is obviously going to be out there
Like
too.
a distraction tactic, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the level of. You never really know the level that these people are playing at, but that if it was a calculated move, that to me would be what they're probably trying to do.
It might be giving them too much credit. I mean, I think it's just kind of like a side effect, but memes get circulated. People just repost things because it makes them feel good. I feel like the majority of it has this added side effect of like, yeah, it's also kind of an obfuscation, or not really an obfuscation, but just a distraction. It's kind of incidental, so. But hey, maybe they're all just masterminds. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know which is scarier: the fact that the possibility that he's a secret mastermind, or that he's got masterminds working for him, or that he is as fucking idiotic as he seems.
And both are pretty scary.
I think I'd almost prefer
Like, he's
mastermind.
just so extremely shrewd. He's just like so good at this that like he knows how to play a crowd perfectly.
I don't have a lot of faith.
Mastermind?
I don't have a lot of faith that Trump himself is a secret mastermind, but he might have hired masterminds. But I think I prefer mastermind as opposed to just like blundering through the world in the most powerful seat in the world.
Okay.
For the next 4 years, I think I'd rather have some sinister torchlit meetings with people with hoods or
A villain you can respect because they're just smart, right?
Yeah.
I think. Well, and like a smart villain probably doesn't want to destroy the world, whereas an idiot wouldn't know if they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to think this is the fucking goddamn. This is the guy who wants to restart the nuclear arms race to show the world that the U.S. is still on top, and this is the guy who announced this.
Dismiss things from the CIA.
But my thing is like, not only is that the stupidest thing to say in the world, but he also announced this to the world on his Twitter feed.
Yeah.
And so like, this is the caliber of person we're dealing with.
I
right?
consider him the tweeter-in-chief now.
Tweeter-in-chief.
That's what he does. But when you made the point that you did not see the Trump thing coming, I also did not see the Trump thing coming. And I guess since I didn't see the Trump thing coming, that despite how far off I think this whole fascism taking over the government is, on the other hand, when Trump first jumped in the primaries, I didn't think he would last 2 months. I thought he was a clown, and
sort of everybody.
Yeah. But he was running up against other clowns.
I guess so. Yeah.
And he just had enough like machismo to kind of pull it off. He was just so supremely confident in his.
But the fact that I was so wrong about that means I should probably consider that I may be very wrong about other things that I think are just absolutely crazy.
Well, I
like
mean,
the fascists taking over next month.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's. There's obviously more to it than that. It's like I'd be careful not to compare two very unlike things. Mm-hmm. Like this is obvious. This seems obvious. I made a mistake here, therefore I might make a mistake here.
It's true. I mean, there was at least a road that Donald Trump could potentially use to get to the White House, even if we didn't think he would take it. Whereas there's no road that I can see at all that the fascists will take over the government.
The other thing too is that just because you're wrong about one improbable thing doesn't necessarily increase the odds of any given improbable thing that you also assign the probability to happening, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are isolated.
Do you think
sometimes they are?
You seemed like you disagreed with me. Do you think there's a viable road for fascists to take over the government?
That's actually I really am undecided on that one. I know that's been kind of my default, but I like to be as informed as possible before I really can have enough conviction to be like, yeah, I think that's a thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, on the one hand, I feel like it seems like a lot of people, at least over the last couple months, have been very like, hey, if we looked at history, these are some patterns that have emerged from history, and they kind of like match that to what's going on now, and they're kind of like, this is the beginning of a fascist regime, and I don't know if I entirely buy that. It's one of those things like I'm just not very well versed in history. I don't know a whole lot about it. It was never really an area of interest of mine. Okay. So I can't really look at it from that context, right? But it does. And again, you go on the internet. There's a high noise to information ratio in general. Like people post these think pieces where they're like, here's the road to fascism, and here's like, yes, Trump's a fascist, and I don't know. I like to be as accurate as possible, so I have a hard time taking those things at face value because they're often from people who have a very like anti-authority, like as a matter of principle mindset. I've witnessed them say other things that make me think a little bit, or I mean, kind of, and by think I mean like it gives me pause, and I have I'm skeptical of what they're saying. But I also don't want to be like, oh, whatever, it's a benign presidency, and then suddenly it's too late, and all these horrible things have happened. And I mean, we've already seen in the last few days,
like at all a benign presidency.
Oh no, I'm saying like months ago, people were putting forth that idea like, oh, it's probably going to be a benign presidency, nothing bad's going to happen.
That's sort of where I was. I think Stockholm syndromed, right? Like I'm like, well, fuck it. We're already staring down the barrel of it. Hopefully, he's not going to be as bad as I thought he was the day before he was elected, right?
And there's this general sentiment of like, like you want to be wrong about like it's like, well, I think he's going to be disastrous as a president, but I'd like to be incorrect about that because that's objectively better. If he does good, if he does well, then awesome. Then I was wrong, and that's great that I was wrong, right? We've already seen now that he's taken his seat in the last few days. It's the people who are like, let's give him a chance, are kind of eating their words now because.
I also had like non-zero probabilities that in his inaugural address he was going to be like, you guys are all fucking idiots. I'm not a politician. And he was going to just quit right there and just give everyone the finger. So now that none of those have happened, ridiculous. I've already seen the words in headlines, President Trump gave an executive order, and I'm like, oh my god, there's no such thing as a benign presidency. So I'm already kind of like still processing this on a real level. It's terrifying.
Did you hear his inauguration address?
I read it.
Yeah, when he delivered the line, "I am never gonna let you down."
I saw the same thing. I
heard someone. I didn't see that part, but everyone was like, "Do you just rickroll us?"
I seriously thought the next line was going to be something about giving us up or deserting us.
Yeah.
Because I was like,
I'll never give you up.
I might have shared the speech in my. I think I would have loved that. Is what I'm trying to say. I mean, to come out of this idiot's mouth would have been so funny. Yeah, I did read it. I mean, it was the exact benign bullshit that every politician says, plus some stuff that I can see why some people would find very appealing. The idea of, well, we're going to bring jobs back to America. This isn't just transfer power from one president to the other. It's not from one party to another, but from the government to you, the people. And everyone's like, yay, he's talking about us. And I get, like, it's populist just jargon that I feel like I saw people saying things like, man, that was a very articulate speech. I think that's pretty cool that he said that. I'm like, he doesn't fucking write his speeches.
Yeah.
No one writes their speeches. If you want to hear what the man talks like and thinks like, watch his stream of consciousness during a debate.
Yeah,
when
right.
he doesn't have a chance to prepare a full-fledged statement, and just watch.
Yeah, language is important, and when you hear him use language, it seems clear he's not someone who enacts a lot of critical thought.
He doesn't so much use language as he just like runs in circles and can talk for 90 seconds without saying fucking anything.
Yeah, it's like yes, Mr. Trump, those were words.
Yes.
Did you see the list of words that were in his inauguration speech that have never been in a previous inauguration speech?
No.
It was interesting. There were I don't remember all of them, but the ones that stuck out were bloody, carnage, and help me,
in reference
please
to
help
ISIS?
me.
Wait,
No, it was This American Carnage. Remember, must stop here.
oh no, yeah,
Most of the words that have never appeared in a previous inauguration
This
speech
American
are all very
Carnage.
visceral. Yeah, like
is someone going to start a podcast called This American Carnage? It's like counterpart to This American Life. With
yes,
Ira
it'd be
Glass.
the alt-right This American Life.
Yeah, This American Carnage with Richard Spencer.
I can just hear him sedately talking to the microphone, just like Ira Glass.
Sipping on some chai tea.
Right.
Are we running out of steam?
I think we're running out of steam.
Wrap up.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate your input, Sean. And
You're welcome.
yeah, thanks for listening and for our little side episode. We'll see how little it ends up being. All right, cool. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm wary of quote mining.
As my ringtone, whenever you call me, I'm going to use, we should be investigating whether and how to do the black genocide, whichever one that was.